he's very, very fond of Semjase, and whether he knows it or not, he really has strong, heartfelt feelings for her. And so he feels a little bit of a sinking feeling here, a little rivalry, he comments in his notes. And Semjase walks back over with this elderly fellow and says, "I'd like for you to meet Ptah." She says, "This is my father." And Billy is immediately kind of embarrassed that he was feeling that way. And she says, "This is my father, Ptah." And Ptah immediately starts speaking to Billy. And Billy's kind of surprised right away that he knows German. And Ptah says, "Very nice to meet you." Just the usual cordialities are exchanged between them. And Billy notices right away that he speaks great German. And he says, "No, I don't at all. I'm just wearing this little translator device here that takes my thoughts and converts it to whatever language that I want it to, any language that we have on our program bank." And Ptah asked Billy if he speaks any other languages, because Ptah doesn't speak German, but he speaks Greek and a few others, and wants to know if Billy can speak Greek, because he'd like to turn the thing off and they could practice. And Billy says, "Well, I speak a little Greek, but not very well." And he says, "Well, that's okay." So he shuts off the little translator box that he's wearing, and Ptah begins to speak this old Greek. Well, Billy is a little surprised that he can actually kind of understand it, and they give him a little device to wear also, so that when he thinks in his own language of German, it comes out in perfect Greek. So they're exchanging things in Greek. Ptah is speaking Greek himself. Billy's thinking German, and it comes out Greek, so Ptah can understand it. So this was how they were conversing. Ptah mentions to him that his name is a little unusual, and asks if Billy understands the historical reference to the name Ptah back on Earth history, that it was used by some Egyptian, he says, leaders. He says he has an old ancestor named Ptah that was used that name, but Billy wasn't familiar with it, and says perhaps he would look that up when he got a chance. Well, they discuss a few things about the ship, and Ptah explains more about what's going on, invites him to sit down, and explains to him that they have a certain mission that they're on, that they're going to be making different stops in different places today where they're going, and he invites Billy to sit down. There's a couple of kind of chairs there in this big horseshoe area, and Billy's looking at all the equipment, and suddenly he looks up. He's looking at the top, at the ceiling, actually at the stars, because you can see right through the ceiling, and notices suddenly that the stars seem to almost blur for a second, like they're streaked, and then they straighten right back up again. And he says, "What happened there?" And Ptah explains that, well, they've just made what we would think of as like a jump in space, that they have just gone from the area they were at in the earthly space, that they just made a jump through hyperspace into the Pleiades now. And that's all it took. There was just a little secondary kind of blurring of the stars. And Ptah is beginning to explain to him a little bit how that worked. He also reminds Billy that they've managed to stop about 153 million kilometers away. They're farther than that, but that's as close as they can get to the end planets. Because, again, these great spacers, like some of their smaller ships, when they make these jumps into hyperspace, then it has an effect on the orbit of the planet. So they had to make sure that they were quite a ways away. Well, as Ptah is explaining to Billy a little bit how this works, he's reminding him that, as it was explained to him earlier, that the universe is made up of coarse matter and fine matter. Coarse matter being the solid, real matter part of the universe, and fine matter are the many different energy levels that also exist in the universe. And that he was giving him a brief rundown again of how it works, that when you make the jumps through hyperspace, first, there's this great speed which is obtained, and they use the great speed, of course, to increase the mass-speed correlation, so there's this tremendous pressure in on the ship that's held back by the screens. And then what they do is they drop the screens, increase the velocity, and break into hyperspace, and once they do that, they can create these time dilations, where they can actually, the ship then is in a fine matter world, and it is no longer solid. They can then project or program the ship somehow to go where it needs to go, and then it comes back into the coarse matter world, wherever it is that they want to be, and it's instantaneous. Time is paralyzed there for a second, so no time is really going by. all that you really notice, he says, is sometimes in the body you can feel the feeling of the body coming back together, because just for a part second it was no longer physical when they've broken into hyperspace and moved into this fine matter world. So Billy's real intrigued about that. And as he's sitting there talking to Ptah, during their course of conversation about a variety of things, which was mostly about Billy's mission and how he was doing and how it was affecting him, they made another jump, and again Billy felt some unusual sensation. And Ptah was picking up on that in his thoughts, and he says, I'm noticing that you're picking up on something here, that you're sensing just a little bit of what it's like to be in the fine matter world. And Billy says, yeah, I'm something I've never really experienced before quite like this, that each time we make a jump and break into this fine matter world, or null time, whatever you want to call it, that there's a very short sensation or connection to that somehow that feels kind of pleasant. And Ptah remarks that yes, that what you're doing is that remember that you are body and spirit, that when the body is no longer physical, that the spirit then has the ability to feel the sensation at being close to eternity or creation, whatever you want to call it. And that just for a part second there, you know that you are a total spiritual being and you're no longer in the physical body. And he was very surprised that Billy could actually sense that. Because he says most people in the Pleiades, they have to be experience this several times and have it explained to them before they really pick up on what it is. And he could tell from Billy's thoughts that Billy was already figuring out what was going on spiritually, that his spirit was somehow touching eternity and sensing the great creational energy of the creation itself. And Ptah thought that was rather amazing that he could actually do that. And then he continued to explain to Billy that he really shouldn't be surprised that he could do that, because he actually was quite aware of Billy's high evolvement. And again, evolvement refers to a number of lifetimes and wisdom learned in those lifetimes. So it's not like Billy is better or less than anyone. He's older. He's lived more lifetimes, and contained within his spirit is the wisdom of things learned in those lifetimes, and that's what spiritual evolvement is. Again, that is the reason for our material life, to gather information with our senses and feed the truth from the result of that logic to your spirit. Your spirit's always open for business, paying attention to what you're doing all the time. So you might want to start considering as you're going through life and you're doing all these things in the material world that there's an attempt always to obtain spiritual growth, that your spirit is inside always paying attention to what you're doing. So be careful what you try to feed it. There was a short conversation about how the ship can actually move in time now, that because of the technology given to them by Askett's people, the Timmers, that this great spacer not only could make these great jumps, it could paralyze time, but they finally had learned to understand a little bit about how to make a time shift. And he began to explain to Billy a little bit how what happens is when you make the jump from hyperspace and create these time dilations, that it's very important that when you're in the fine matter world, that the particles of the ship do not change their velocity. If the speed of the particles is changed, in particular slowed down, if it varies, well then there's a change. When you come back into the physical world, you will have slipped millions, maybe even billions of years in time. It's that sensitive. And he was starting to explain that a little bit, and Billy was getting just a little lost, and he was curious how fast they were going at the moment. And Ptah showed him some dials or something there on the equipment and how they were working, and Billy was able to figure out the speed that they were going at and relate it to kind of like, and I've translated it to miles per hour. It came out to 280,000 kilometers per hour,